Former Cabinet Minister, distinctive and sometimes divisive leader of the House, once occasionally referred to as the Honourable Member for the 18th century, joins us now. It's Jacob Rees-Mogg. After falling from political grace, Jacob has now made the thorny transition from parliamentary brouhaha to broadcaster and now finds himself and his family the subject of a new reality TV show. Meet the Rees-Moggs. He joins us now. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you.
You're about to become mega super terribly famous next week. Peter and I have both watched it. My children insisted upon watching it. When I said to them, I'm interviewing Jacob Rees-Mogg, he's got a television show, a reality TV show, they were so excited. They insisted on watching it with me. So it's funny, you seem to have cut through with Gen Z. Do you know what Gen Z is?
I do, except I'd say Z. I'd go for the English pronunciation.
Well, it's brilliant. It's I love it because it's so it's very candid, but it's also what I love about you and your family is that you are completely authentic in your extreme poshness, which is unusual in this day and age, isn't it?
Well, we are what we are, and I've never thought it would be any use pretending to be something else. I think people would see through it, and therefore, if you're going to let the cameras in, you have to do things that you normally do. Otherwise, why would anyone watch it?
No, quite. Well, why did you decide to do it?
Why did I decide to do it? Well, when they first got in touch with me, I actually thought it was a spoof. Politicians do get letters from people trying to catch them out, and either to make them look very silly and vain, thinking, oh yes, people would be interested in making a programme about us, or a sting for whatever reason. So I was a little suspicious to start with, but I have had an agent for some time, so I passed it to him to make discreet inquiries, and it turned out to be serious. And I was thinking it would be much more political, because I'd done something years ago for Channel 5 where they'd come and filmed surgeries and done that as a reality of what it's like in a surgery, which I thought was quite useful way of explaining what MPs spend a lot of time doing. So I thought it'd be that, and I thought it would be Westminster, and then obviously a bit of family on the side. Of course, the general election changed everything, because the initial plan was to film from, say, June to December, with the election at the end, the denouement at the end, and then it was all reversed. And the election was at the beginning, but we had 4 more episodes that we needed to film, 3 more episodes that we needed to film, without politics in, or without me being a member of Parliament. So it then became more about the family. So it's slightly how it evolved by chance.
How did the family cope? Because when I was in politics via my ex-husband Michael Gove, I used to find I know your son has had death threats. I think that's correct.
He's had hate mail.
Hate mail. Sorry, but I found it very difficult for my children. Well, they found it very difficult, and I found it very difficult as their mother. Were you worried about that at all?
It was certainly something we thought about. What effect would it have on the children? And we had discussions with the team, Optimum, who made it, about how the children would be portrayed, and that could we say, if one of them had a terrible tantrum, look,
take it out.
Take it out. And they were very protective of the children, actually, all the way through, and behaved extremely well. In terms of the greater risk, the name Rees-Mogg, for better or worse, is an unusual name, and my children get that anyway. And I didn't think that this would make it any better or any worse, wouldn't particularly increase the level of attention or disapprobation they would get from being called Rees-Mogg.
Well, I mean, my daughter who's watched it says that your daughter is the star of the show. And she's actually brilliant in it. I love her. Well, I suppose it's because she's the only girl as well.
She's the only girl. She was very enthusiastic about it. Episode 4 is my favourite episode because it's mainly about Mary.
Okay, I haven't seen that. We haven't seen that, no.
And Mary went for it with gusto, and I think's done it beautifully. But then, of course, she's my daughter. I think she's wonderful. Of course. I think all my children are.
Of course. So going back to politics, I mean, you're out of politics now. Are you relieved? Are you happy, unhappy? Do you regret any? Is there anything you regret?
I loved being in politics. I loved being a member of Parliament. I am now doing GB News 4 nights a week, and probably have as good a platform to discuss politics on that as I would do as a backbench MP in opposition. So it's also easier to be more forthright. I'm not that I was particularly unforthright beforehand, but there were certain things you felt constrained to say, and now I can be clear about my views. And so I'm enjoying that part of it, but I love the rough and tumble of the House of Commons. In terms of what do I regret, I think the thing I regret most is not being clearer during lockdown that I was opposing it. Not after the initial bit. I went along with the initial bit, but when we got to May and June and we opened up, after that I never wanted to lock down again. And I was too mealy-mouthed in the discussions that we had about that. I indicated that I didn't like it, but I should have gone much further. And that's my biggest regret, because I think in hindsight, the length of lockdown was a huge error.
I think you're completely right. What do you think, Peter?
Oh, I think you're right too, but I think you should have spoken out against it from the start.
Yes, I was. I accept. I was wrong on that. But it was at the start. You just didn't know. I think you did know by May, June.
Oh, I knew.
And everybody was being under.
Well, I always felt, because I was still living with Michael at the time, I always felt very strongly that Boris's original idea, which was to sort of do a mirror thing, which was to basically protect the vulnerable and let everybody else carry on, was the correct way to go with it. Sorry.
Well, no, I don't want to argue over that one again. But what I was going to ask you was, are you now in danger of becoming show business rather than politics? You just mentioned you have an agent.
Well, I've had an agent for a long time, and that was to do with a book I wrote, not necessarily hugely successfully, a few years ago. And so that's why I had an agent. No, I think politics and showbiz are very, very different animals. The thing about politics is that if you believe in things and you say what you believe in, you will alienate some of the people some of the time, and sometimes you'll alienate quite a lot of people. There's no point in being in politics if you don't say things and stand up for them. If you're in showbiz, you want everybody to love you all the time, and that's completely corrosive for politicians. They can't do anything useful if they try and put themselves in that position.
I'm still a bit puzzled as to why you did this. I did a sort of reality television show last year, in which I pretended to be in prison, and it had.
But you were in prison.
You were in prison. You wrote about it.
I was in a fake prison.
But you wrote about it, and you were with
fake prisoner.
Somebody who'd committed a pretty nasty crime.
Oh yeah, but it wasn't. You know, there were panic buttons to press and so forth. It wasn't a real prison. But the effects have been interesting in terms of what the sort of people who come up to me on the street now and say things. But I wasn't in the same position you were in. I hadn't been a cabinet minister, and I hadn't been a member of parliament, and I'm in a different trade. But it changes your life in all kinds of subtle and unexpected ways. The other thing about these programs, I'll shut up in a moment, was very important to me, is that you don't know until you see it how they're going to portray it. You may think you're portraying yourself in a certain way, but the bits which they leave in and the bits which they leave out, and there's an awful lot they leave out, which no doubt you liked, are not necessarily the ones you want them to leave in.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We did not have editorial control. That was with the production company and Discovery Plus. And that's the risk of it, that there is a risk that you do these things and they are disastrous. There is an issue for politicians and a boundary that they have to work out which side of it they want to fall. That is to say, to get your message across, you need to be known, because then you get invited on to the Daily Mail podcast. On the other hand, if you're entirely doing showbiz things, nobody takes you seriously. And I was absolutely fascinated last year how well Nigel Farage did by going into the jungle of all things, which I had always assumed, and I said this to him before he did it, was for politicians something that put you off the edge and into the wrong category. Actually, it turned out that he managed to do it in such a way that he boosted his link to younger voters. More younger voters voted for Reform than for the Conservatives at the last election. And it was a very good launch pad of all things for the general election. And I think if you want to get arguments across, the need to be known means you have to do things that you're not necessarily naturally comfortable with.
Yes, I mean, they often say that politics is showbiz for ugly people. Politics is also a popularity contest, and unfortunately that's, you've got to make people like you. But I think your point about Nigel is very interesting, because he's hugely popular with the younger generation. My children think he's hilarious. They just love him, and they love his TikToks, and they love his and I think that the gatekeepers of politicians no longer exist anymore. You have to interface directly with the voter, and you've got to build a person. You've got to build an identity that people can really relate to.
Well, I would say that both Nigel Farage and Donald Trump are both show business figures. Donald Trump from the start, and Nigel Farage from when he realised that was the direction he wanted to take. You're not, and therefore you're taking a different risk when you do this. Well, it's another small thing. It's infuriating to anybody interested in politics to watch the initial part of the programme where voters in your constituency are interviewed about you. They plainly know nothing about what you think or what you have said or who you are. But they hate you in many cases, actually say that they hate you because they've been encouraged to view you as a hate figure by the largely show business coverage which politics gets in this country. Don't you find that rather infuriating?
No, not at all. That's the reality of democracy, that people are entitled to have strong views about politicians without knowing them personally. Inevitably, they're not going to know them personally. And I have confidence that over the country as a whole, the people who take one view and the people who take another will balance out to get the government that the country needs and deserves.
But that would work if they knew who you were. But they don't.
No, you can't.
All this was that Lord Snooty top hat, which was stuck in all the windows of people who weren't going to vote for you. They didn't know who you are. They don't know what you think.
But that doesn't matter. That you don't have to pass an intelligence test or to take an exam to be allowed to vote. You are allowed to vote, nor should you be. I mean, they used to do that in the Deep South before the Civil Rights Movement. I'm a strong believer in democracy. The British people voted for Brexit. They voted for Margaret Thatcher. They vote the Conservatives out when the Conservatives are useless. They may have found with Starmer that they've got a pig in a poke, but it's quite understandable why they got rid of us at the last election.
Yes, but do you think that the sort of the kind of new media landscape, the internet, social media, do you think it skews people's understanding? Because what Peter's talking about are those tropes,
I think the way messages have got across throughout the country is probably much more similar to the way it's always been than we think. I once read a book on political pamphlets in the 14th century, and it was absolutely eye-opening because I didn't realise they had any political pamphlets in the 14th century.
Yeah, they just invented the...
No, they haven't invented printing, but they are manuscript, they are sent round, they are delivered, they are read out in villages. That even then, messages get out about how people are being governed, and inevitably, people will have strong opinions. They'll be delayed because it will have taken time to write the thing out and deliver it. And this has been going on much longer than one thinks. If you look at the cartoons in the 18th and early 19th century, which are much more vicious than cartoons of today, which were spreading around the country. If you look at politicians' ability to use early radio, that politicians have always adapted the communications tools at their hands, and they date back a very long way.
This is why I suspect that what you're doing here by going on this programme is trying to get back into Parliament by joining, as it were, that world in which you aren't judged by what you think or what you say. You're judged by what people think you are.
But you're, as always, a great flatterer because you're assuming I'm much cleverer than I am. Because when I agreed,
I'm not assuming anything.
When I agreed to do this,
as you well know,
when I agreed to do this, I didn't think that we were going to have quite such the election disaster that we did. Although we hadn't formally signed anything by the time the election was called, we were talking about it for some months beforehand. When I thought that we wouldn't have an election until we'd picked up at least a little.
But even so.
So it was something I was thinking I'd be doing as a member of Parliament, as somebody actively involved.
But when you thought about what you can't have done it because you need the money, because you don't. But you must have done it for some reason beyond the sheer fun of having your home and house invaded for weeks and weeks and weeks by by people pressing your children to buy drum kits.
Did you?
Sixtus was desperate for drum kits.
So you say.
It's true. It's absolutely true. It is absolutely true that he was very. I mean, how many 7-year-old boys don't want a drum kit? Sixtus really did want.
And how
one.
many 7-year-old boys' parents do not want them to have a drum kit?
I give in to my children almost invariably.
Well, you've got a big enough house to have a drum kit. I think most people would struggle. I think, is there a sense that when you're a politician and everybody thinks they know everything about you and they think they understand you and they think they can, and they judge you and they, as Peter said, they sort of put you in a kind of nice little box. Is there an element of just wanting to say, well, actually, this is who I am. This is who I really am. Presenting a version of yourself that is in some way yours rather than everyone else's.
Well, I've never tried to pretend to be anything other than I am, because I think that you are in a stronger position politically if people know who you are and what you stand for, and that you're not trying to pretend to live differently. So I wasn't really trying to expose anything I thought people would be surprised by. I probably wasn't analysing it in quite that much detail. I was just thinking, is this an interesting thing to do? What are the risks? What are the advantages? What's the effect on the children? Rather than how am I presenting myself?
Going back to politics, what would you say was your sort of major achievement, your biggest achievement during your time?
I think my biggest achievements as a Member of Parliament were constituency ones, with things that I did for individual constituents that had a fundamental effect on their life. And they're few and far between. They're occasional each year. But they're the ones that I'm proudest of when I look back.
And are you sad not to be in Parliament this Friday because there's a vote on assisted dying? I wanted to know what your views were on that. Well, I mean, I don't want to make assumptions.
Well, I read your piece yesterday, which I think is... My position is a religious one, and I am against it in principle. But I thought the argument you were making, that you can't trust the state in these circumstances, is absolutely right. If you think during lockdown we were all being told to protect the NHS, that was our main job as citizens, was to protect the NHS. With a strained NHS budget and people living longer, how long is it that before you have to protect the NHS by feeling that you ought to die?
Come on, shuffle off.
And but the elderly put pressure on themselves and hate being a burden, and they will be saying to themselves, however much their family says, we want you, how much their doctor says, we want you, they'll be saying to themselves, I'm a burden to my family and I'm a burden to the NHS, therefore why don't I go along to the doctor and finish things off? And I think that's a terrible thing to do in principle, and I don't see there's any protection you can introduce in law that changes that. I also believe that we each have a soul that is loved by God equally, whether we are healthy or ill, able-bodied or disabled, and that value is fundamentally undermined, and the lives of us three here have suddenly become more valuable than people who are 30 years older than us. And I think that's a tragedy.
Did you think that the programme gave you enough of an opportunity to stress the religious side of your thinking and the Christian basis of everything that you say?
I think so. And again, the crew were very respectful of religion as, in many ways, a very private part of one's life. And so they did film certain things, but they weren't being intrusive, and I thought that was right, because one's private devotions are one's private devotions, and when you give alms, your left hand should not know what your right hand has done, and when you pray, you should pray in a private room and not stand in the street corner. And so I was slightly worried that my religion becomes too public, because the instruction from Christ is that your religion should be private.
But it is one of the most distinctive things about you in politics, that you are prepared to state openly that you have a religious affiliation and that you believe in its precepts. Not very common, is it?
No, and I admire the Lord Chancellor for making it clear that she will oppose assisted suicide on the basis of her Muslim faith. I think that is very impressive and particularly courageous of her, because I think it's much easier to be religious and a Conservative than it is to have a faith and be in the Labour Party, which I think is fundamentally hostile to faith, not quite as bad as the Lib Dems.
Did you feel under pressure of the sort, not of the sort of people shouting at you and demanding and saying, let's do this. Did you feel under pressure to make more of a soap opera of your lives while you did this than in fact turns out to have been the case in what I've seen so far? And we've not, for instance, yet seen the famous double-breasted pajamas that everybody believes you possess, or any of that side of your life.
You're not going to see me in a state of undress. There is only one scene.
Would double-breasted pajamas be a state of undress?
Oh, definitely. There's only one scene where I'm playing cricket with Alfred, where you will see me without a jacket on, and you will see my braces. Now, that is as far as it goes in the raciness stakes. This is
scene where you're without a tie.
Are these your sock braces or your trouser braces?
My trouser braces. I don't wear socks.
Like these.
Like these, exactly.
I don't know.
Yes.
I'm rather thinking you might wear sock braces.
No, I don't wear sock braces.
My daughter has sent some questions. Can I read them out to you?
Of course you can, yes.
It says here, in capital letters, questions for Mogg. Name all the Kardashian sisters.
I can't. But I think they have a lot of Ks, don't they?
They do.
They do.
Can you name one of them?
Is there one called Kim?
That is correct, yes. But she also wants to know, do you know what star sign you are?
I do, yes.
What are you?
I'm Gemini.
But do you read your horoscope?
Peter, what star sign are you?
Every morning.
No.
Well, I do, but I would never dream of reading a horoscope.
Do you read your star sign?
I think there's something fundamentally pagan about it as well, so I've by it.
The Catechism of the Catholic Church is against horoscopes.
I would have thought it would be.
It is, but I'm not interested anyway.
No.
But it is.
No, but my daughter's 20.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it's a wonderful. I love the Kelvin Mackenzie story. You know the Kelvin Mackenzie story? The horoscope person from The Sun is called in to see him, and he says, "As you already know, you're fired."
Yeah.
Whether it's true, I don't. He's a regular on my TV newspaper.
There are so many good Kelvin Mackenzie stories.
I share a birthday with Hank Marvin of the Shadows and the former president Ahmadinejad of Iran, and if you can make any kind of horoscopic...
I can see similarities.
I share a birthday with the late Queen Victoria and with Dominic Grieve.
Well,
there you go.
Well, you might make something out of that.
As someone who has many children, all of them at private schools, what's your feeling about this VAT thing and the general private school argument? I mean, I have to say one thing I would just interject is that we sent our children to state school, and I think being in a state school as the child of a Conservative politician is one of the most difficult things you can ask any child to do. And I think if I had my time again, I would have insisted on sending them to private school just because it insulates them a little bit.
I also think that Michael's education reforms were the best things that we did in the 14 years that we were in government, and we look at the PISA lists and the improvement in literacy, which fundamentally has changed the life chances of millions of children. And politics is a family business. You were part of that. You should be so proud of that achievement.
But if you're Beatrice Gove and you're going into year 7 and your father has just changed all the grades and everyone's saying to you, you know, your father has ruined my life or it's very difficult.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
No, I calculated that for every £1 I pay in school fees, with VAT I have to earn £2.25. Wow. That gives you context of quite how high taxation is in this country. And I think it's going to be very difficult for a number of schools. I think it's difficult for many, many parents. It's going to be difficult for parents with children at Eton. And you're going to see a knock-on effect all the way through. And that will put a charge on the public sector as more children go into state schools, inevitably. But it is pure class warfare. And it's classic socialism. When you look at education in this country, in the private sector, we have world-beating results. We are some of the best, and we get children coming from all around the world because of that. The state sector is not succeeding as well. No. And so what's the Labour answer? Is to cut down and attack the bit that's doing well.
Well, it's levelling down.
It's levelling down. It's classic levelling down.
That's what they always do. Everybody has to be the same as the lowest common denominator because otherwise you're an elitist person.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I have a long and tedious position on this, which I won't trouble you with, but it's actually about reforming the state education system, as Michael didn't do.
Well, only because he was fired.
To reintroduce selection by ability instead of selection by wealth, which is what we have now. Every form of education in this country is governed by selection by wealth, private and state. and it's a disgrace, and no one's done anything about it since 1965, including your lot. So if you want to discuss it, I'm happy to do so, but I don't think it's what you came here for.
Well, I think the thing is that Michael was doing some very difficult reforms, and a lot of people didn't like them, and the person who was in charge at the time, whose name I'm not going to mention, was too weak to stand behind him.
I completely agree with you. It was that was an absolutely dreadful reshuffle.
Yeah.
Because Michael went from education, we lost any direction there. Nick Bowles went from planning reform, where he was doing interesting things. He was
passionate about it. Still is, actually.
Sir Michael, who then went on to be Defence Secretary, was moved from doing fracking. And so we had three big, brave things that were going to do a fundamental reform to the country. And all three of them were moved because there was momentary polling that indicated it wasn't popular. It was the worst reshuffle that I can remember.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to argue with you Tories about these internal
talking about
problems that you have, but I would ask you one other thing which emerges from the bits of the programme that I've seen is you seem to have a bit of enthusiasm for one Alexander Boris Johnson, and I quite have to ask yourself how you fit that in with your general religious worldview and everything that goes with it.
Well, Boris the first Catholic to be Prime Minister.
Well, this is true. But there
are
other
I think we know where Keith's going with
it. Boris,
it's not just a members' club. You say, well, he's
Boris is my co-religionist,
so I support him. I'm thinking part of his political performance as well as everything else. Do you really think that he was a particularly successful Conservative Prime Minister, or that it would be a particularly good idea to have him back?
I think we wouldn't have got Brexit done in the way it was done, or indeed really done at all, if it hadn't been for Boris. We probably wouldn't have won the referendum without Boris. And then I think another leader, well, Theresa May was not trying to do Brexit, and another leader who was runner-up was Jeremy Hunt, would not have delivered Brexit.
It's hard to remember all these people.
I know there's so many of these elections, but Jeremy Hunt wouldn't have done it either. So I think Boris' fundamental Brexit, which is the most conservative thing that the party has done in generations, that it is restoring the right of this country to govern itself. It is so important.
Fundamentally, something the Conservative Party didn't want to do, which is why it
but Boris did.
So
you're challenged to me.
I mean, most of us who were talking about this on the eve of the referendum thought that he'd come out for Remain. I never detected much of enthusiasm for leaving him before the referendum.
I think you're very unfair.
That's partly my job, but I'm not saying anything untrue there. When we went round the office, trying to work out who was going to take which side before the referendum, both Boris Alexander Johnson and Michael Gove, both generally were people thought would be in the list of those in favour of remaining.
But I
once walked all the way around Hyde Park 3 times with Michael Gove, trying to persuade him to be in favour of leaving the European Union, and he wouldn't. So I do speak with some understanding here.
All right. First of all, you just had to read Boris's articles to realise how hostile he was to the European Union.
Which ones?
Over decades and decades in the Telegraph. Yeah. It was a consistent theme. It was how he made his name, was by mocking the European Union. And on the point you make about Michael, it depends so much on the date. Even Bill Cash and people like that, including me, weren't saying in 2010 that we should pull out of the European Union. It wasn't a political option. And there are times when you can't say, I would like to do this, because you appear to be, if you wanted to leave the European Union in 2010, you appeared to be on a fringe of politics.
Yeah.
You had to talk about reforming it, changing it, seeing where it would go. By 2015, that had changed, and it changed once the referendum was announced. A lot of people, even as the referendum was called, who opposed it vigorously, were saying, well, we'll wait and see what terms David Cameron gets. Yeah. Because politics goes like that. And the current issue is the Green issue. In 2019, the Green orthodoxy was so strong that anybody who said anything against it was seen to be a fringe and fanatical figure. Now, people realise that being cold and poor is not what the electorate want.
Isn't it your job to be a fringe and fanatical figure?
No, it's not.
That's wrong. And Peter Lilly I think I have several criticisms of Peter Lilly, but on the Green issue,
he voted against the bill.
Vote against that outrageous bill.
4 others
raises him up on a pedestal of political integrity, which very few people reach. He actually saw it as wrong at the time.
You can't.
The damage is still done. And it'll take years to.
You can't win political arguments when the time is completely against you. And there are other political arguments that are going on that you need to win too. And if you entirely marginalise yourself on one argument, you're not listened to on where should the economy going, what economic policy should we have, should we still have independence of the Bank of England, which has been a catastrophe and a dreadful Bank of England, an incompetent Bank of England. Do you want to devalue everything you say by being Cassandra, right but early? You have to avoid supporting it. I'm not saying for a moment you should advocate policies that you don't actually believe in, but you have to time your interventions to a point when people may be willing to listen.
Those of us who are Cassandra, as indeed I am, would say that if other people had backed us at the time, then most of these problems would have been avoided. And it's the unwillingness of people to step out, which is so often the problem. You've said.
I wish that were true.
Yeah.
If you go back to the original Cassandra, people just weren't willing to believe her. And indeed, because she said, get rid of the wooden horse, everyone thought the wooden horse is fine. And that if you say it as a Cassandra, you often don't get other people to join you. You get other people think, well, I'm afraid he's saying it, therefore it's bound to be wrong.
She was actually subject to a curse.
She was, indeed.
To be right and never to be believed.
Indeed.
I don't believe I am, but and you certainly are.
Well, I certainly don't believe the god Apollo curses people.
The real point here is that I'd like to return to is, would you favour the return of Mr. Johnson to frontline politics? Do you want to see him as leader of the Conservative Party again?
I think Boris is the most charismatic figure the Conservative Party has. And I thought getting rid of him was completely ridiculous. He may be the only person who can bring back those voters who've gone to reform, but time will tell. I mean, obviously I want Kemi to do well, and she also is a charismatic figure, which is powerful.
But if she doesn't do well?
Boris is there. He's what was it he said? He used a rugby analogy. Let's use a cricketing analogy. He's waiting in the slips for a tickle.
I did love that line in your show where your wife says, "Oh, he said let's go for a cricket team." Most people say let's go for a football team, but in your house, it's we're aiming for a cricket team. How many people are on a cricket team? I don't know.
We're 11 people plus. You usually have a 12th man. Yes.
But politics is like comedy. It's all about timing. If you don't get the timing right, you can't get the thing that you need to get done. I mean, and there's a lot of satisfaction in saying, "Well, I was right," but
it doesn't happen.
If you're right at the wrong time, it doesn't matter. You still can't get what you need to get done, and that's the problem with politics. You've got to choose your moment. I mean, in terms of Kemi, I think her biggest challenge is reform. I mean, everyone says it's uniting the Tory party. I don't think there will be a Tory party if she doesn't deal with reform.
I completely agree with you. It's entirely about reform. Some people think it's about appealing to the Lib Dems. 1% of Conservative voters went off to the Lib Dems. The seats we lost to Lib Dems, we lost because people stayed at home or voted reform, and therefore our vote collapsed. The Lib Dem vote didn't go up.
No.
So no, we need to be a proper Conservative party to appeal to reform voters. And those Tory MPs who are essentially soggy Lib Dems need to get some backbone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think but it's a real challenge for her.
It's very hard because the membership of the party, and I speak to associations probably as much as anybody does, are absolutely sound. They believe in Conservative things. There are a number of MPs who have sort of been sucked into the cosy establishment. They believe the green orthodoxy. They're never much like Brexit. They're rather sort of sniffy about people talking about immigration. They don't necessarily know what a woman is. This is not good enough. This is not Conservative. And that route is disaster.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is we've still got a bit of time. I mean, she may succeed, she may fail, but at the moment that is the main problem, is trying to bring the party back into that Conservative space.
And the Right Reverend Keir Starmer is doing everything he can to help the Conservatives. I mean, one's beginning to think he must be a sleeper for us.
But yes, that is a thought that had crossed my mind.
If he is a sleeper, he's certainly not a sleeper for the Conservatives, as any student of his past would tell you, as I am.
Yeah, a sleeper for the hard left.
In my Cassandra role, I can tell you exactly what we're
Well, the most sinister thing about him that people don't talk about enough, but really the Mail should, is that he prosecuted any number of journalists for receiving information. And that's the sort of thing that totalitarian states do. He does not like freedom of the press.
No.
At one point, we were prosecuting more journalists in this country than Iran and places like that, and it was all Keir Starmer. And it wasn't phone hacking. It was that they had spoken to people in the Ministry of Defence and policemen, and they'd got information from them, and they were being prosecuted for receiving information, which is deeply shameful.
Is that something you can actually do?
Well,
Was he successful?
No, none of the prosecutions worked.
Okay.
They all failed. The jury system and our justice system protected us.
Good.
The people who gave the information were successfully prosecuted,
Right.
quite rightly, because they were breaking the law, but the recipients of it were all cleared.
That's very sinister.
Can I ask you about the programme again? You've presumably seen the whole thing.
I have, yes.
Is there anything that you're waiting to happen that you will put your hands over your eyes when it is screened?
Well, I'll confess I don't like watching myself on television.
I don't think anyone does.
And it's sort of, I very, very
That's
rarely.
what you're doing on
I
television.
very rarely do. I do my GB News programme. When I started doing it, I watched it to see how I was doing it. Was I doing things that annoyed me? And if I did, should I change them? But actually, I don't routinely watch recordings of things that I've done. I know what I've said, and it's always slightly awkward, isn't it?
No, but I'm just wondering if there's anything
Is there
that we have yet to see that you really wish wasn't.
You'll have to subscribe to
Or
Discovery
anything-
Plus and
or anything-
watch on Monday.
Anything, of course, as you can see,
Those
I'm bound to do
famous
that.
double-breasted
Is there
pajamas.
anything that got left out that you would really have liked to have been in?
Well, there's a very funny bit actually of Sixtus that is in. There's a longer edition for abroad, and it's Sixtus at Weston-super-Mare operating one of those things that
Those grabbers.
grabbers,
Yeah.
and they all fall out
Of course.
always. And he is there, aged 70. It's a scam. It's an outrageous scam. And I just think this is tremendously funny to see a little child sort of having seen through it, and that's in the. I think it's in the overseas one, but it's not in the British one.
You were, of course, in a documentary, weren't you? And you were,
was,
what,
yes.
12, I think?
Yes, I haven't watched that.
Have you not watched it?
No one asked your permission, I imagine, did they?
No, you didn't get. Just did it.
It just happened. One of my favourite moments, your two boys talking about whether your house is a mansion or not. Of course it's a mansion. There was a certain amount of applause in my house at that moment.
Out of the mouths of babes and
Well,
sucklings.
it is a mansion,
yes.
isn't it?
I thought there was a moment where your rather lovely, I don't know, cleaning lady, housekeeper was making your bed and saying how I don't know if it was your bed or someone's bed anyway, and saying how terrified she was of you. And I thought that was so sweet.
That was, yes, I was rather sorry about that because it hadn't occurred to me that people who were working in the house thought I was an ogre. I think my children would tell you that I'm a complete pushover.
I love Nanny. Nanny's
Nanny's
amazing.
Wonderful. Nanny's absolutely wonderful.
Yes.
And
How long has she worked for you?
59 years. She predates me as a member of the family.
That's extraordinary.
Shouldn't she at some stage stand for election? She has so much accumulated political experience and wisdom that I think it's a shame that the nation has been deprived of her.
She didn't do this election, but she was the most wonderful canvasser because being a nanny, she's very good at listening and is just very kindly. And she campaigned for me in Central 5, and she was absolutely...
I remember that.
She was wonderful, and we lost her at one point because she was so popular. She'd got invited in by an elderly lady for a cup of tea.
That was it.
Where on earth she got? But she made a wonderful, calm, listening tone.
Yes, and your wife is similar. I'm not going to say that you've married your nanny, but
I certainly didn't do that.
but she's amazing. I love her at the beginning. It's clear, like all political wives, she knows exactly what's going to happen at the election, which is that you're going to lose the election. Did she actually say that to you at any stage?
Yes, she put it very. She said, well, before the election was called, we thought we were toast, and now we think we're burnt toast. Helen was very robust about this, and I also obviously knew, and I actually wrote to my 3 boarding school children on my House of Commons writing paper, to say to them, this is the last time I will write to you on House of Commons writing paper, because it's very unlikely I will win the seat.
How long before the election did
That
you write
was,
those letters?
well, almost immediately the election was called, because you're not allowed to use it after the dissolution.
Yes, there's all sorts of rules, yeah.
And just for the record, I paid for the postage because it was a private letter, and I actually always paid for a modest amount of stationery to use for personal use, because brilliantly IPSA doesn't allow you to use the stationery for private use, but the House of Commons rules do.
Did they write back to you?
No, they don't often write back. I try and write.
If you were a corresponding family.
I try and write to them once a week, to the boarding school children. As I say, they can't read what I write, so they then bring them home and say, "What's this say?" But once
I have seen your handwriting. It's not that bad.
But once you're a candidate and you're in the thing of it, you can't be going around to everybody saying we're losing.
Yeah.
You have to try and maintain momentum. And I had a wonderful conversation with my agent about halfway through the campaign, where we both tentatively were saying to each other, you do realise we're going to lose, but both of us not wanting to make the other too gloomy, which is why we hadn't said it before.
Are you going to stand again?
I mean, I'd love to. I love being in the House of Commons. I'd need an association that wanted to select me and all those sorts of things.
We're the same. Couldn't you be?
Well,
the candidate?
I had huge boundary changes, so it's all rather different.
Right.
But you're very attached to that.
I'm very attached to that part
Somerset
of the country. I'm very attached to that
yeah.
part of the country. But obviously, you need to be selected. You need to go through the rigmarole to get back.
When will that happen?
I don't know. I don't know what the plan is. The central office will know.
Well, they haven't presumably appointed a new candidate yet, have they?
No, that won't happen for some time.
No,
I wouldn't have thought.
No. Well, it's important. I think you should stand again in that seat, because you'll probably win it back.
Well,
who's your who?
It was won by Dan Norris, who's the mayor of the West of England Combined Authority.
Right.
It was given to him by reform, basically, wasn't it? I mean, if the reform vote had gone to you, you'd have held the seat.
That is true. That is true. But we alienated our own supporters, and they went off to reform. You're absolutely right, but I don't blame reform. I blame us for creating the circumstances for reform.
Well, yes, but even so, you can't have been pleased by what happened, and you presumably might have hoped that, given your own well-known positions, that you might have been spared that.
Well,
isn't it all a bit arbitrary that anybody is slaughtered in these mass expulsions which take place, and it almost never, quite often people who've been quite distinct in all their statements and behaviour are still wiped out.
Yes,
in a general massacre.
I think it shows the good sense of the electorate, because actually even somebody like me, who had a reputation for not always following the party line, in 98% of divisions I voted with the party whip. You vote for a Conservative candidate, even an independent-minded one votes the party whip, and therefore you know that you're really voting for the party and the leader more than you're voting for the individual, and I think that is the reality of our system.
Are you sorry that you voted with the whip so much? Would you, given the chance again, now vote differently?
Most things that you vote on are not fundamental one way or another, and therefore most votes are not. You're voting against opposition amendments that are put down that are completely stupid and are put down just to provide something for the House of Commons to do. They're not going to change the world. I think most of the time I was pretty clear on principles of bills that I didn't like. As I say, I think my big mistake was not being more outspoken on the extremes of lockdown.
But nothing else that you really wished that you had been more demonstrative on, even if it had...
Well, most of them I was.
Do you regret falling asleep on the benches? Or did you actually not fall asleep?
I wasn't asleep.
Because that was a defining moment of your career.
Well, it probably wasn't the cleverest thing I ever did. But as I say in the programme, there is an element of me that quite likes winding up the left. And Caroline Lucas thought it was absolutely disgraceful that I wasn't paying attention to one of her rather boring speeches. It is not an obligation in the House of Commons to pay attention.
Be more interesting, Caroline.
And make less predictable speeches.
Given the chance again, would you do that?
No, I wouldn't do that again. It was a mistake, but it was a very boring.
Never leave you, will it?
No, but it was a very boring debate.
It will never leave. It's like Michael and Boris. It will never leave him, and your benches you will be forever.
That's right.
But you will be forever slumbering on the benches of the House of Commons in someone's head.
But you also say in the programme, when somebody accuses your party of having a massive lurch to the right, I think is the phrase, that I think afterwards your comment section, you say, I wish there had been a massive lurch to the right. What would that contain? What would you regard as a massive lurch to the right?
Well, actually being conservative.
Well, come on, specific.
Well, okay. We shouldn't have put up taxes. We should have kept expenditure under control. We should cancel the net zero targets, which are absolutely insane and are making us cold and poor. And we shouldn't have turned against all our own supporters. All Michael's bills attacking landlords I absolutely hated. The Osborne changes that made it unfavourable to be a private landlord for tax reasons, the last budget that decided to hit people with holiday lets. How many people with holiday lets do you think vote Labour? So I was against kicking our own supporters in the shins. I was against higher taxation.
Social policy, political correctness, the Equality Act?
The Equality Act should be repealed.
You think it should be?
The Equality Act, the Climate Change Act, and the Human Rights Act should all be repealed. And just to add to the fun, we should pull out of the International Criminal Court, which is a disgraceful organisation.
Exactly.
Any other lurches that we should know?
Well, I don't think these lurches to the right. I think these are sensible, common sense policies.
To me, it's not a lurch to the right. To me,
Would you ever be tempted to join Reform?
No.
Good.
I'm too much of a Tory. I'm too tribally Tory ultimately, and I could certainly work with Nigel. I think the Tories may need to work with Nigel, but I'd be letting far too many people down if I changed party.
What if the Tory party actually fell apart? Would you then consider reform?
If ifs and ands were pots and pans, there'd be no need for tinkers. So I'm going to fall behind the politicians' hardy perennial of I don't answer hypothetical questions.
Except, of course, just answered about 20 hypothetical
that's
questions.
That's absolutely true. It's absolutely true.
Not answering
that particular hypothetical question.
I think on that note, we may end. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope the show is a success.
Thank you very much.
And I hope you one day come back into politics.
Thank you.